If charged with a crime of battery in Florida, the state attorney's office must prove 3 elements against the defendant to prove their case beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt. They must prove that there was an intentional touch or strike against the will of another. Let's look at each of those 3 elements. First is intent. Battery is a specific intent crime, meaning the defendant must have intended to touch or strike the person. If it were accidental, say you're out at a park or you're getting ready to throw a frisbee and you throw it so hard and didn't realize there was a person next to you and you slap them in the face, that's an accident. There might be a civil battery. If you knock their teeth out, they might be able to sue you to recover for the cost of those teeth or something like that. But it doesn't have the intent that a crime of battery would need. Second is somebody must actually be touched or struck. If nobody is touched or struck, there still might be a crime of assault or an attempted battery, but it does require that somebody actually be physically touched or something they're holding or wearing is touched. It's important to note that injury or pain is not an element of a battery. So sometimes when clients approach, well, I barely pushed them or I barely hit them. Well, that's a battery. If you've hit them intentionally and it was against their will, that's a battery regardless of any injury. If there's severe injury, that can actually enhance a battery up to a felony charge of felony battery or aggravated battery, depending on the circumstances or injury. And the third is, again, it must be against the will of the person receiving the battery. This prohibits prosecution from people engaged in mutual combat, people who might be wanting to engage in physical touching. Let's say you're at a gym or you're doing jiu-jitsu or boxing or things like that. If the person understands that there's going to be touching back and forth, again, that is a potential defense to the crime of battery. It's important to talk to an attorney in your area about your specific case. What is the evidence as to each element? The analogy I often use with battery cases is if we go back to 4th grade science class, we had the fire triangle. To have fire, you must have 3 things. You must have oxygen, you must have fuel, and you must have heat. If any one of those is missing, you don't have fire. Like that, a battery must require intent, somebody must be touched or struck, and the state must prove it was against the will of another. That's often the element that falls apart when a victim does not want to discuss the case or show up is they can't assume that the person didn't want it. Somebody is going to have to testify that they were touched or struck and it was against their will for the state to prove all 3 elements of battery.